Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where we do a fair and objective analysis of the church and its truth claims, its history, doctrine, and policy. So, we've been doing a multi episode series looking at Joseph Smith's polygamy. In part two, if you didn't watch it, we had a look at Fanny Alger, who is considered to be Joseph Smith's first plural wife. She was living with the Hales and helping Emma with housework in around 1833-34. It's disputed when the marriage took place, but it's most likely some point between 1834 to 36. We had a look at some of the sources that would indicate it was an adulterous affair. Oliver and Emma probably would have believed that. We also looked at some of the sources indicating it was a marriage, such as Eliza R. Snow and Mosiah Hancock. I would definitely probably lean towards that there was a marriage ceremony. Although there isn't a whole lot of documentation, there's nothing said firsthand by Fanny, by Joseph, or Emma on the matter. So a lot of it is secondhand recollections. I do think that Joseph Smith's polygamy.org by Brian and Laura Hales is a great website to go to. It has all the documents on there. I think Brian Hales is a great historian and scholar for polygamy. He is faithful, but he's very transparent. He doesn't hold anything back. So if you want to find out more, I would go there. And I use a lot of Fair Latter-day Saints and Brian Hales for this series. So tonight, what we're going to be looking at is this is kind of linking and connecting with the previous episode about Fanny Alger. We're going to be looking at Doctrine and Covenants 101 and the Church's statement on marriage. This used to be in the Doctrine and Covenants up until I believe it was 1876 when it was removed and replaced by D&C 132. We're going to be looking at the sealing power, which was restored in the Kirtland Temple by Elijah, the sealing keys to bind, to seal people for eternity, husbands and wives. How could he have been married to Fanny Alger before he had the sealing power? And then the law. Was polygamy legal when we look at the law? So let's start off. This comes from LDS Discussions, and this is what they have to say about being married for eternity. So this is the point they make. The sealing of husband and wife for eternity was made possible by the restoration of priesthood keys and ordinances. On April 3rd, 1836, the Old Testament prophet Elijah appeared to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery in the Kirtland Temple and restored the priesthood keys necessary to perform ordinances for the living and the dead, including sealing families together. There is simply no way that Fanny Alger's relationship could have been a marriage with proper sealing keys. There is also no way that Joseph Smith's 1831 revelation would have had any connection to what is happening in this Kirtland vision, because the ideas simply were not developed by Joseph Smith about sealing, even at this moment. So, really, the point he's making here is so plural marriage is tied to D&C 132, which is the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. Plural marriage is connected with eternal marriage, which can only be done through sealing and through the sealing power and the keys, which weren't restored until 1836 when Elijah came to the Kirtland Temple. So he's kind of pushing back, saying, well, the church is indicating that he received this revelation as early as 1831, but that would have had nothing to do with sealings and priesthood keys because that didn't happen until 1836. So Fair Latter-day Saints, this is what they have to say on the matter. They say, so how could Joseph and Fanny have been married in 1831 if the sealing power had not yet been restored? So some have wondered how the first plural marriages, such as the Alger marriage, could have occurred before the 1836 restoration of the sealing keys in the Kirtland Temple. It comes from D&C 110. This confusion occurs because we tend to conflate several ideas. They were not all initially wrapped together in one doctrine. Plural marriage, the idea that one could be married in mortality to more than one woman, was being taught by 1831. Eternal marriage, the idea that a man and a spouse could be sealed and remain together beyond the grave, was being taught by 1835. Celestial marriage, the combination of the above two ideas in which all marriages, plural and monogamous, could last beyond the grave by the sealing powers, was implemented by 1840 to 1841. So I think the point they're trying to make is that this understanding, this revelation about marriage, plural marriage, eternal sealings, that this developed over time, or it was revelation coming line upon line. It wasn't revealed to Joseph Smith all at once. He didn't completely understand it all at once. He sort of grew in that light and knowledge. Thus, the marriages to Fanny would have occurred under the understanding of the first statement. The concept of sealing beyond the grave came later. Therefore, the marriage of Joseph and Fanny would have been a plural marriage, but it would not have been a marriage for eternity, so they wouldn't have been sealed. Perhaps it is worth mentioning that priesthood power already gave the ability to ratify certain ordinances as binding on heaven and earth, from D&C 1 verse 8. Now, the sealing power was given mention in early revelation, such as Helaman 10:7, that the coming of Elijah and his turning of the hearts of the children and fathers was also prophesied in 3 Nephi 25, 5-6. This supports the view that it is unlikely that Joseph was just making up the sealing power and priesthood power extemporaneously to justify getting married to Fanny and having sexual relations with her. This is what Brian Hales has to say on the matter. So when Joseph Smith performed the monogamous marriage of Newell Knight to Lydia Goldthwaite Bailey in Kirtland on November 24th, 1835, he said, "Our elders have been wronged and prosecuted for marrying without a license. The Lord God of Israel has given me authority to unite the people in the holy bonds of matrimony. And from this time forth, I shall use that privilege and marry whomsoever I see fit. And the enemies of the church shall never have power to use the law against me." Then he says, Brian, whether Joseph then contemplated using that authority to perform a plural marriage that God recognized, even if the government did not, is unclear. It is possible he had already done so, ordaining Levi Hancock to officiate as he married Fanny. So the church and Joseph Smith and the elders of the church actually didn't have license or authority to perform these civil marriages, but Joseph believed that he was given that authority through the priesthood in the eyes of God to perform those marriages, and it would seem that he must have given that authority to Levi Hancock, who was the one who officiated and performed the ceremony of his marriage to Fanny. So that would be Brian Hale's thoughts on the matter. Let's move on. Why did the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants include a statement of marriage that denied the practice of polygamy at a time when some were actually practicing it? So this comes from the Fair Latter-day Saints website. So the article on marriage was printed in the General Church Membership, the D&C 1835 edition, section 101, and in the 1844 D&C, section 109. This portion of the article on marriage is relevant to polygamy, and it states, "Inasmuch as this Church of Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy," so they're indicating that the church has had these accusations where people claiming that they've committed the crime because polygamy was illegal, of fornication and polygamy, "we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife and one woman but one husband, except in the case of death, when either is at liberty to marry again. It is not right to persuade a woman to be baptized contrary to the will of her husband. Neither is it lawful to influence her to leave her husband." So that was in the church's scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants, that they believe that one man should have one wife, one woman, one husband. That is the position or standard of the church. Fair Latter-day Saints acknowledged this was true. The church membership generally was not being taught about plural marriage, and we're not living it at this time. And I think you could go further and say not only were they not being taught plural marriage, but what was in the Doctrine and Covenants actually contradicts it, that they believe their position, the doctrine in the scriptures is that they only believe in monogamy, not polygamy. But at this time, Joseph Smith did apparently marry Fanny Alger. So they go on to say the statement itself was not changed between the 1835 and 1844 editions of the Doctrine and Covenants. In fact, the statement remained in the Doctrine and Covenants until the 1876 edition, even though plural marriage had been taught to specific individuals since at least 1831. was practiced in secret since 1836, and then it was practiced openly. It was made public to the church membership in 1852 when they got to Utah. The matter of not removing it in 1852 was simply due to the fact that a new edition of the Doctrine and Covenants was published or was not published until 1876. The available evidence suggests that Joseph Smith supported its publication. It's been told that it wasn't Joseph Smith that wrote this, it was Oliver Cowdery, that Joseph Smith didn't have anything to do with this. But Father Latter-day Saints acknowledged that while some have suggested that the article was published against Joseph's wishes or without his knowledge, the available evidence suggests that he supported its publication. It was likely included to counter the perception that the Mormons' practice of communal property included a community of wives. So there they indicate, although it's speculation, that it was against the wishes of Joseph Smith. He was the prophet and president of the church. The evidence indicates that he did support and condone this publication, which is, he probably wanted those rumors or those accusations that they might have been practicing polygamy. He didn't want them to circulate, so he wanted to give it an official position. However, you could say that this is deceptive or not being honest. So in July 7th, 1878, Joseph F. Smith discussed Oliver's awareness of polygamy at the time of this publication. So this is Joseph F. Smith. To put this matter more correctly before you, I here declare that the principle of plural marriage was not first revealed on the 12th day of July, 1843. That's when D&C 132 was recorded. It was written for the first time on that date, but it had been revealed to the prophet many years before that, perhaps as early as 1832. About this time or subsequently, Joseph the prophet entrusted this fact to Oliver Cowdery. He abused the confidence imposed in him and brought reproach upon himself and thereby upon the church by running before he was sent and taking liberties without license, so to speak. Hence the publication by Oliver Cowdery about this time of an article on marriage, which was carefully worded and afterwards found its way into the Doctrine and Covenants without authority. This article explains itself to those who understand the facts and is an indisputable evidence of the early existence of the knowledge of the principle of patriarchal marriage by the prophet Joseph Smith and also by Oliver Cowdery. So Joseph F. Smith believed that Oliver Cowdery wrote the statement on marriage without the authority and permission of Joseph Smith. However, Father Latter-day Saints would say the evidence supporting this kind of runs contrary. So this comes from Gilbert Scharf's, I think you would say that. So he says the original section of D&C 101, which was never claimed as revelation, but was approved as a statement of belief, did state that monogamy was the practice of the church at that time. The section was not written by Joseph Smith and was voted upon by members in his absence. Perhaps the section was intended to prevent members from getting involved with plural marriage until such a time as the practice would be authorized by the Lord's church or by the Lord church-wide. When that became the fact, the current section 132 replaced the old section 101. I think they're trying to be very, very kind and very fair. I think looking at the evidence, Joseph Smith was aware of this publication. As the prophet, if he didn't write this and if he didn't approve of it, he could have stopped it being canonized. Joseph Smith wanted the church members to believe this and to keep his practice of polygamy secret and not public. So a critic's response to some of this: some scholars have asserted that D&C 101 was merely an advisory statement, never intended as God's will, in spite of it being canonized in multiple versions of the Doctrine and Covenants. Additionally, they argue that Joseph was out of town when Cowdery's article was affirmed. Even the most ardent defenders of Joseph Smith concede, however, there is also some evidence that an article on marriage was already anticipated and cited 4 times in the New Doctrine and Covenants Index. I'd also acknowledge there's other scriptures early in the Doctrine and Covenants that talk about to love your wife and to cleave unto her and none else, which was prepared under Joseph's direction and probably available prior to his departure. Thus, if a disagreement existed, it was resolved before the prophet left. Further, Joseph neither edited nor removed the article despite personally supervising revisions of the 1844 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. Notably, Smith's revelation concerning polygamy was never canonized during his life and was clearly written to be shared only with a small audience. It seems evident that the original definition of LDS marriage was an early defense against polygamy. The words reproach with the crime of fornication and polygamy hint at the rumors that had already been spreading about the secret practice of polygamy, yet the simple and arguably disingenuous definition of marriage remained in the D&C for 41 years, but was quietly removed in 1876, as it contradicted the more favoured D&C 132. Although LDS leaders have been practicing polygamy for over 30 years at the time of the inclusion of D&C 132, plural marriage had only been publicly acknowledged by Brigham Young since 1852. That's, I think, a brilliant summary of the critics' position and their response to that. So let's move on. Was polygamy illegal in the United States? So this comes from Mormon Think. Polygamy was always illegal whenever or wherever the Mormons practiced it. It was even illegal in Canada and Mexico, as they only recognize marriages that are legal in the person's home country. John Taylor, the third president of the church, claimed that he believed in keeping all the laws of the United States except one, the law in relation to polygamy. Most of Joseph Smith's polygamous marriages occurred in Illinois in the early 1840s. The Illinois anti-bigamy law, enacted in February 12, 1833, clearly stated that polygamy was illegal. You can read through that quote, what it has to say about bigamy. 12th Article of Faith. Again, this should be familiar, but I'm going to read what President Gordon B. Hinckley has to say. He says, "I wish to state categorically that this church has nothing whatever to do with those practicing polygamy. They're not members of the church. Most of them have never been members. They are in violation of the civil law. They know they are in violation of the law. They are subject to its penalties. The church, of course, has no jurisdiction, whatever it is, in this matter. If any of our members are found to be practicing plural marriage, they are excommunicated, the most serious penalty the church can impose. Not only are those so involved in direct violation of the civil law, they are also in violation of the law of this church. An article of our faith is binding upon us. It states, we believe in being subject to kings, presidents, rulers, magistrates, in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. One cannot obey the law and disobey the law at the same time." Now, I think I sort of admire President Hinckley that he's reinstating that we believe in honoring and sustaining the law, and that's why the church doesn't practice polygamy. He's really trying to, move away from it. At another time, in an interview with Larry King, he says that he condemns the practice of polygamy. He doesn't believe that it's doctrinal, and he doesn't emphasize it. But if you compare it with the quote from John Taylor believes in honoring and sustaining the law, except when it comes to polygamy, because it was a revealed doctrine and a commandment. So that's quite a big change, because you would say, well, the early church were breaking the law by doing this practice, and how could they, how could God justify, or how could they justify God commanding them to do a practice that was breaking the law? How do we make sense of that? So Farr's response, they say the practice of polygamy during periods when it was illegal is a clear case of civil disobedience. This is hardly new information, and church members and their critics knew it. Modern members of the church generally miss the significance of this fact. However, the practice of polygamy during periods when it was illegal is a clear case of civil disobedience. So the decision to defy the anti-polygamy laws was a painful exception to an otherwise firm commitment to the rule of law and order. Significantly, however, in choosing to defy the law, the Latter-day Saints were actually following an American tradition of civil obedience. On various previous occasions, including the years before the Revolutionary War, Americans had found certain laws offensive to their fundamental values and had decided openly to violate them. Even though declared constitutional, the law was still repugnant to all the saints' values, and they were willing to face harassment, exile, or imprisonment rather than bow to its demands. Now, I think the point they're trying to make is that this law sort of undermined their freedom to religious worship and religious practices. They believe that polygamy was a religious practice, and they think it wasn't constitutional or right, these laws, and that was maybe why they continue to practice polygamy, because they didn't agree with these laws. However, it was still breaking the law. Elder James E. Talmage taught that members should obey the law unless God commanded an exception. A question has many times been asked of the church and of its individual members to this effect. In the case of a conflict between the requirements made by the revealed word of God and those imposed by the secular law, which of these authorities would members of the church be bound to obey? Pending the overruling by providence in favor of religious liberty, it is the duty of the saints to submit themselves to the laws of their country. So yeah, we're meant to follow the laws of whatever country we live in. Obviously, the saints saw the practice of a polygamy as a commandment from God, and they felt like they either had to obey God or to obey the law of the land. Now, a critic might think, well, surely God wouldn't ask them to practice something, command them to do something that is illegal. That doesn't seem like something God would do. But that's obviously what the early saints believed, and they chose to obey God, which meant breaking the law. So in summary, Joseph Smith married Fanny Alger before the sealing power had been restored, but believed marriages for time could be performed through priesthood authority and was likely done by Levi Hancock, who performed the ceremony. Doctrine and Covenants 101 was written by Oliver Cowdery. It denounced the practice of polygamy and put forth the church's position, believing in monogamy was the church's standard of marriage. It wasn't written by Joseph Smith, but no doubt it was supported and condoned by him. And it remained in the Doctrine and Covenants until 1876, when it was replaced by D&C 132. Polygamy was considered illegal in the United States, and the church did break the 12th article of faith to honor and sustain the law by following this commandment, so this exception to it. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the angel and the drawn sword account. So where did these accounts come from? We're going to look at some of these different accounts that Joseph Smith was telling people that he was commanded to restore the practice and to marry many women. So that'll be the next video. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Give me some feedback and any questions or comments that you have. You can follow me on my Facebook page, Mormonism with the Murph. And if you want to get in contact with me, you can via Facebook or by my email. And if you care to support me, you can via PayPal to my personal account, stephen.murphy1996@outlook.com. And I will see you all on the next episode. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.